Hey, eighth graders, it's time for you to learn about the American Revolution. This is a really important war because this is the war that makes us a country. So the years of the American Revolution was 1776 to 1783. Take good notes. All right, let's start where we left off. What happened to those who signed the Declaration of Independence? Remember, we discussed in class that signing the Declaration of Independence was like signing a death warrant. Well, here's some of the things that happened. 5 were captured by the British, though they were eventually released. Approximately 12 of the signers had their homes ransacked and burned to the ground, and one even lost his son in the Continental Army, which means some of them went on to fight and so did their families. Some even suffered several wounds in various battles. So why do you guys think some of these signers became targets of violent acts? Go ahead and pause the video at this time and you can fill it into your notes. Although the colonies declared their independence in 1776, no country in the world recognized it as an independent nation until after the war. So why do you think this was the case, that no one in the world would recognize all 13 of these colonies as their own independent nation? Go ahead and write that into your guided notes. In New York City on July 9, 1776, patriots celebrated the newly declared independence by pulling down this statue that you can see in this painting of King George III. It was later melted down and made into bullets used against the king's soldiers. How cool is that? One of the really neat things that you guys are going to see when you watch The Patriot, the movie, is that they incorporate this content information within the movie by having the main character use his son's little toy soldiers that he melts down over a fire and then he rounds them out into bullets. So in the Patriot movie, you're going to see a lot of similarities to real history. Now, one thing you need to understand about the American Revolution is that it was a war between the Americans. It was not just a war between the British and the Americans, but it divided everyone who lived here too. At least one American in 5 was a loyalist, and perhaps as many as 1 in 3. And some people say people would change sides during the war depending on which army was closer because they always wanted to keep their families safe. Now, while Americans fought passionately for independence, loyalists fought just as fiercely for the British king. Friends and families all over were divided over their loyalty to Britain. Some people who grew up together, who were friends or neighbors, might be on opposite sides of the battlefield. Now let's take a look at the advantages and disadvantages of each side. So first, we're looking at the British. Now, the British had the strongest navy out of everyone in the entire world. They were experienced, they were well trained, they had more money, and they had a larger population of people, nearly 8 million, to pull from when fighting this war. But on the opposite end, they did have some disadvantages. They were fighting on foreign soil, which means they had to come all the way across an ocean, and they had a long supply line for everything they needed. So if they needed guns, they needed bullets, they needed food, they had to wait for that boat to get across the ocean before they could get those supplies. They also relied on mercenaries. Now, mercenaries is a fancy word for hired soldiers. Now, do you remember at the end of Road to the Revolution, the king hired 30,000 German Hessians after the petition for peace had been sent by the Continental Congress? Those German Hessians are considered to be mercenaries. Now, this is a strong disadvantage to the British. Why? Those mercenaries have absolutely no loyalty to the king except for a paycheck. Now let's take a look at the Patriot side. They're fighting on their own soil, they're protecting their homes and land, they have a shorter supply line so they can get things as quickly as they need it, and they had superior leadership. They had General George Washington leading them, so of course that's a huge advantage for the Patriots. You also have to remember the Patriots can't lose this. They are fighting with everything they have. It's independence or die for them. Now, obviously, there's many disadvantages of the Patriots. They had a smaller population of people who lived in the states, 2.5 million people to pull from. They also lacked a well-trained regular army. So a regular army are well-trained soldiers who could fight anywhere in the colonies. And they lacked a well-trained regular navy. So they did have to make that from scratch. They had absolutely no military experience, at least not the military experience the British had. They had a short supply of weapons and ammunition. They also had a volunteer army, which is the militia, so they weren't formally trained. And on top of that, not all the colonists here are going to support the war. Some of them have decided to remain loyal to the crown. So let's hear from you. Now that you've learned the advantages and disadvantages of both sides, we want you to apply that information and form an opinion. We want you to answer the following questions on your guided notes and be prepared to defend your claim to the class. Based on the facts that you have been given about both the Patriots and the British, who should win this war and why? We'll go ahead and give you guys a second to write that down. We can pause the video at this time. There are a lot of famous people during the Revolutionary War, and a lot of people call them our founding fathers. They're famous for many reasons. They led the people, they did wonderful things, they got people to support us so that we could win the war. But either way, however you look at it, all of these people are famous in one way or another, and all of their faces start to appear in Road to the Revolution / Revolutionary War era. The first of which we can't ignore is General George Washington. He's the leader of the Continental Army. Now later on, he's also going to become our first president. It does make sense that General George Washington is the leader of the Continental Army. As you guys know, he got a big reputation for being very brave during the French and Indian War and for being the first to strike a blow against the French. And he's credited big time with our win. The next face of the Revolutionary War is John Adams. Now, John Adams came up in Road to the Revolution. If you remember, he was a leader of the Sons of Liberty, so he's a total patriot, and he later will become the second president of the United States. Don't forget that he is a brother to Samuel Adams. Next, Samuel Adams. Now, Samuel Adams started the Sons of Liberty, and remember, he participated in the Boston Tea Party and is the brother of John Adams.